Everybody. Good evening or good morning, wherever you're calling from. Thank you for joining us. My name is Austin Hedrick, and I'm the Asia Regional Advocacy Coordinator with the American Friends Service Committee, and I'll be moderating our panel this evening, which is called Building Bridges, Pathways to Trust Between the U.S. and North Korea. And this event is hosted by the National Committee on North Korea and the American Friends Service Committee. Our panel discussion tonight will delve into the critical challenge of fostering trust amidst a prolonged diplomatic stalemate and deepening mistrust with North Korea. Each of our panelists brings a breadth of experience working on North Korea and will offer their perspective on the role of trust in advancing both humanitarian and diplomatic progress. I want to note that tonight's program will be recorded and it will be uploaded to NCNK's YouTube channel after the event is concluded. I ask you please don't take any screenshots during our webinar tonight, but if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A function, and I'll be sure to read those out during our Q&A session following the speaker's remarks. So tonight, we'll be hearing from Dr. Jin Kim, followed by Heidi Linton, and finally, Linda Staheli. So without further ado, Dr. Jin Kim is the Kim Dae-jung Chair Professor of Peace Studies at Hanshin University and Adjunct Professor at School of Religion, Theology, and Peace Studies, Trinity College, Dublin. His research interests are in the areas of peace process, peace building, humanitarian and development cooperation. He conducts engaged research collaborating with various humanitarian, development, and peace-building organizations. He was a Goodwill Ambassador for Peace on the Korean Peninsula at the South Korean Ministry of Unification from 2020 to 2022. He's the author of The Korean Peace Process in Civil Society Towards Strategic Peace Building. He's also co-author of Peace and Conflict in a Changing World, Key Issues in Peace Studies. And he is the co-editor of Reconciling Divided States, Peace Processes in Ireland and Korea. Dongjin has also published numerous research articles in international and Korean peer-reviewed articles. Dr. Kim, thanks for joining us this evening. I'll pass the mic over to you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Austin. It's a privilege to be here with all of you to discuss how we can build trust among conflict parties in the context of the Korean Peninsula. The title of this webinar, Building Bridges, especially resonates with me as an engaged peace studies academic introduced by Austin, working with peace-building organizations in conflict-affected societies such as Korea and Ireland. While peacekeeping often means constructing barriers between militaries, peace building is about building bridges between ordinary people. In many peace processes, high-level peacemaking aims to achieve a cessation of war by establishing a security line between conflict parties, often under the banner of peacekeeping. The Korean Peninsula exemplifies this, the demilitarized zone, DMZ, a term that is itself ironic as it remains one of the most heavily militarized regions in the world, not only separates armies, but also prevents civilian interaction between ordinary people, cutting off opportunities for trust building between them. Over time, this separation fosters generational animosity and mistrust, and where animosity and mistrust persist, the risk of war never fully disappears. So security without interaction becomes insecurity. When there is no space to meet the other side, there is no space for trust. The result is a perpetual security dilemma, where each side assumes the worst intentions of the other. In traditional understanding of international relations, breaking out of this security dilemma is seen as very challenging because trust between states is considered nearly impossible, a calculated risk at best, made under mutual suspicion and guided by national interest. The problem is that this IR framing reduces people to abstract entities such as nation states in a self-centered geopolitical game. Moreover, although trust needs time to grow, state policy cycles demand speed, optics, and quick wins. That pressure undermines the very conditions in which trust might take root. However, from the perspective of peace building, trust is more than a diplomatic tool or summit soundbite. It is a deeply human condition. Trust does not emerge from signed papers between abstract entities. It arises through human relationships, through lived experiences, through the slow and often fragile work of connection, which should not be considered in research and practice based on states as the basic unit of analysis. For decades, efforts in South Korea to engage the North drew upon a shared national identity, one nation, tragically divided by Cold War politics. This sense of common nationhood allowed people to see past the rigid categories of state interest and instead recognize each other as fellow Korean people. But that narrative is now fading. As we know, the DPRK formally abandoned the unification discourse now. Meanwhile, younger generations in South Korea increasingly view the North not as a estranged kin, but as a foreign threat. This raises a profound question. What happens when the idea of one nation no longer anchors peace efforts? Perhaps this moment invites a shift. Trust may no longer stem from same ethnicity or nationalist ideals in the contemporary interconnected world anyway, no matter how polarized it may seem at the moment, but instead be reimagined as a process of mutual recognition of differences and making space for one another as fellow human beings embracing those differences. In protracted conflict, it is easy to assume the worst. Hostility becomes an identity. Enmity has helped define who we are in the Korean conflict context. To let go of that is unsettling, a threat to ontological security. After all, a known enemy can feel more stable than the uncertain terrain of trust. In this context, even humanitarian gestures can be treated as criminal acts, threats to national security on both the giving and receiving ends. So humanitarian aid must thread its way through an unwieldy maze of gatekeepers. And we know security means very different things to the DPRK, ROK, and the US. What one calls deterrence, the other hears as an existential threat. Recent statements from Kim Yo-jong are sobering. She has rejected the idea of dialogue with ROK and reaffirmed DPRK's commitment to its nuclear program. To many, this appears to shut the door on diplomacy. So why persist in these peace-building efforts, especially humanitarian effort, when states refuse to cooperate and define their relationships as hostile? Because peace building should not be about tactics, it should be about who we are. If we believe in human dignity, then we act, not to manipulate others, but to remain faithful to our own values. For many of us, it is shared humanity. We don't want children to suffer from humanitarian situation in any country. We don't want our grandchildren to inherit war. An example would be the Hello My Friend campaign launched in the mid 1990s by a South Korean organization called Akgeonmu Children. South Korean children were invited to draw self-portrait and messages for children in the North. This was radical. I grew up under a South Korean military dictatorship that asked children to draw North Koreans as demons. There were even national contests for this. But Hello My Friend campaign reversed that. It asked the children to draw themselves as human beings and imagine the other as a friend. These drawings were eventually delivered to the PRK, leading to a historic 2004 visit by South Korean children to Pyongyang as part of a humanitarian exchange. This project, now called Drawing Hope, continues today, although the inter-Korean drawing exchange became almost impossible. In 2024, the collection of the past drawing exchange was exhibited in LA, the US. It then traveled to Belfast, Northern Ireland, and this year to Cape Town, South Africa, including drawings from children in all three conflict-affected societies. This message is simple and profound. A child hope speaks across every border, and it reveals the line that adults, mostly men, have drawn through conflict. Each of these places also reminds us that bridges can be built. On the island of Ireland, following the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, the constitution was amended to recognize that the future of Northern Ireland should be determined by its people, not by territorial claim. John Hume, a key architect of the peace agreement, emphasized that Irish unification was not about state territory, but about people. The Korean division and the Irish partition are different. But what would it mean if peace building on the Korean Peninsula were pursued not as nation state building in the territory, but as the recognition of shared human dignity? In South Africa, I encountered the philosophy of Ubuntu. I am because you are. This echoes a deep truth for many of us. My child cannot be safe if your child is not safe. The challenge is how to help people in the DPRK recognize our intention for peace, not as a hidden agenda, but as a genuine act of care for all humanity in the region and in the world. Perhaps one key to building trust lies in being true to ourselves. If we are democratic, then we should approach DPRK as people shaped by democracy. Too often, democratic states limit or criminalize contact with DPRK in the name of national security. But if we value freedom, civic agency, and human rights, then we must also believe in the role of citizens, young people, humanitarian workers, educators, artists, faith communities to build the human infrastructure of trust. When we prevent these human engagement, we are not protecting democracy, we are shrinking its reach. Democratic societies must make space for their people to act democratically, moving beyond identity boundaries and reclaiming the shared identity of being human. A child drawing, a consistent humanitarian gesture, an advocacy for peace, these may seem small, but they accumulate into the memory of being in human relationships. Even when a political peace process between states fluctuates, we can still choose to trust our shared humanity, not because we expect everything to change overnight, but because trust itself is a form of resistance against fear, against cynicism, and against despair. In 2025, Korea marks 80 years of division, but trust in human society is older than that. Trust grows from memory, the memory of being trusted, of trusting other fellow human beings. Even when that memory is buried by pain or betrayal, it can be revised through repeated acts of integrity. Persistent efforts to build bridges between conflict parties is not only about efforts to build trust between states, but also restoring the trust that we are all human beings wishing to live in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, for those insightful comments. I appreciate it. I want to remind those in the audience, if you have any questions for Dr. Kim or for Heidi and Linda, once we hear their remarks, please go ahead and use the Q&A function, and we'll be sharing those questions later on in our webinar. Next, we're going to hear from Heidi Linton. Heidi has worked with Christian Friends of Korea since its founding in 1995 and began serving as executive director in 2002. CFK has delivered over 98 million in aid into North Korea. Work prior to COVID is focused primarily on delivering humanitarian and developmental aid related to prevention, treatment, and capacity building with the National Tuberculosis and Hepatitis Treatment Systems. CFK's projects include installing gravity-fed solar-powered clean water systems, passive solar greenhouses and training, operating room and solar-powered laboratory renovation projects, transportation and agricultural support projects, as well as ongoing basic humanitarian support within the context of relationships and trust building. CFK, together with Stanford University School of Medicine, jointly developed the National TB Reference Laboratory beginning in 2009 and continued ongoing technical assistance efforts. Heidi Linton served on the leadership team for the US NGO USAID-sponsored food aid programs of 2008-2009, and CFK also participated in the USAID NGO flood relief efforts of 2011-12. Prior to the DPRK's extended border closure, Heidi regularly led quarterly CFK visits to North Korea to confirm the arrival of shipments, continue training efforts, and complete technical projects while building relationships and trust. She made over 61 visits to the country, including travel to every province. Heidi received her BA from the University of Washington and MS from New York University. Heidi, thanks for joining us. I'll pass the mic over to you now.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Good morning to all of you, and thank you for your interest in participating today. A big thanks to Austin and AFSC and NCNK for putting the program together, and very grateful to Professor Kim for his very eloquent and meaningful remarks, and also to Linda, which I know she'll give us a very good overview of what she's been doing, and for your longstanding efforts to build trust and relationship in your spheres of influence. I'm honored to serve on this panel with both of you. From 1995 up until COVID closed the borders in early 2020, we saw successive trust building in a quarter century of engagement. It wasn't always a constant slope. There were real setbacks and surges caused or influenced by a variety of factors, but the long trajectory during this season was one of increasing mutual trust. In 25 years of work, we went from very basic deliveries of food and medicine sent to a few locations to highly complex ongoing programs at many locations, requiring significant preparation and follow-up work to be done when we were absent from the country. When our multi-specialty teams were present in the country during 3 to 4 extended visits each year, our visits required significant preparation beforehand and for different kinds of complex activities to take place simultaneously, including infrastructure renovations, often in rural contexts, extensive training, lab development and sample processing, diagnostic and treatment clinics involving coordination among multiple locations, dozens of local staff, and hundreds of patients, and widespread travel for verification and program delivery. Each of these activities had complex logistics, personnel, and support requirements for successful implementation, and required significant investment and coordination on the North Korean side between local, county, provincial, and central authorities, and also among line ministries. That coordination and investment could not have been generated or sustained without a commitment to shared goals and objectives and increasing levels of mutual trust. The infrastructure needed to support this was built over time, both on the North Korean side and on our side. Strengthening the infrastructure itself, both physical and relational infrastructure, also built and deepened trust. Not only was trust building important within the North Korean context, but it was also equally important with external partners, to include, among others, donors, partners, suppliers, and logistics partners, banks, and regulatory bodies, to name a few. I'll relay one of many real-life examples for contexts. In the early 2000s, we sent a number of vehicle parts for our vehicles, specialty parts needed for specific pieces of medical equipment at individual hospitals in the countryside, and also some sports equipment for use by patients at tuberculosis facilities. And this was long before such equipment was sanctioned. We loaded the container ourselves in North Carolina, and I made sure that each item was carefully marked as to its final destination in both English and Korean before it was loaded. Several months later, I came with a team to confirm the arrival and distribution of this equipment. And even though our visit came many months after the container had arrived that included these items, we were discouraged to find almost none of these specialty items that we had promised to try to find had been delivered to the various locations in the countryside. As the trip wore on, it became a bigger and bigger problem. Finally, we returned to Pyongyang determined to try to figure out what had happened to all these specialty items. We insisted on visiting the warehouse where our container was offloaded, which to that point had not been regularly permitted, and it took considerable time and effort for our counterparts to get approval for us to visit there. We arrived at the main logistics warehouse, and after searching, were happy to find many of the missing marked items, but very unhappy at the disorganization we found and how goods were stacked and commingled from many different donors. It became a significant issue of discussion in our closing meetings with higher-ups, but we received a promise that the problem would be fixed. We were also asked to supply a forklift truck, a request that in the moment felt very impractical since the buildings all had high thresholds that would prevent the free movement of a forklift truck in and out. Upon our departure, we were deeply concerned about the future of the program as our work was increasing in complexity, yet we had little confidence that the considerable time and expense invested on our side would be matched with the necessary care and attention to detail on the other side. It was a long several months of concern and uncertainty until our next visit. But our concerns had been heard, and early in the next visit, we were told they had a surprise for us. And we were taken to visit a building at the logistics center, a big empty one that bore a sign with our acronym overhead. Inside, a crew was refinishing a concrete floor in a large warehouse that we were told would be solely dedicated to receiving our goods. They had kept their promise. Furthermore, other improvements had been made at the complex which would allow the free movement of a forklift truck around the complex. We were thrilled and very pleased to tell them that we would place an order for one upon our return home. A problem was identified and discussed, a solution was generated, the problem was solved, and their request was granted. It was a win-win for everyone. The successful resolution of this issue and the trust that was built in the process, both relationally and infrastructure-wise, built the foundation for this delivery of many more containers and the successful completion of many more, deeply more complex projects. So what are some of the barriers to building trust with North Koreans? I'll name just a few. Poor alignment of goals and priorities. Without completely aligned goals and priorities, it's very difficult to build trust. Your objectives are going to be different. The degree and the movement towards those is going to be uncoordinated. It's just not going to work very well. A lack of continuity in relationship. Turnover of partners on either side is a problem. Obviously, you build trust institution to institution, but you also build trust individual to individual, and that continuity is crucial. A lack of sincerity on either part, not being genuine, not being honest, will kill trust building. A lack of integrity, inconsistency between your principles and your morals and your actions. We need to do what we say and keep it simple. Impatience, pushing too far too fast or giving up too quickly. Overpromising or underdelivering. You must keep your word consistently. You must not promise what is not in your power to deliver. And finally, I'll close with this one. Not hearing what is not being said. Often there are hidden issues that the other side cannot reveal or that is beyond their context to process. Look for what is not being said and seek ways to creatively and respectfully bridge those gaps. I'll close for now and look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, Heidi, for your very insightful remarks. I'd like to remind folks to go ahead and leave questions in the Q&A if you have any for Heidi, and we'll get to those following Linda's remarks. Next, we'll hear from Linda Staheli. Linda serves as founding director of Global Collab Network and has more than 20 years of experience advancing international science engagements and another 10 years addressing arms control and national security issues, working for CRDF Global, managing governmental relations and scientific diplomacy outreach, including founding and serving as secretariat for the USDPRK Science Engagement Consortium, directing the National Institute of Health Division of International Relations at the Fogarty International Center, managing international relations for the President's Science Advisor at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and serving at the U.S. State Department, managing U.S. government S&T relations with Japan and South Korea, and the Central and East European Joint S&T funds. Linda has also worked with RAND, Council for a Livable Wage, and the Democratic National Committee. Linda holds an MA in Public Management with a focus on national security from the University of Maryland, and a BA in International Studies from the University of Washington in Seattle. Linda, we are glad you're here joining us. I'll pass the floor over to you.
So just give me a moment. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, see if this works. Tell me if you can see this. Just a second. We're not looking at Zoom. We're going to play from the start. Okay, can you see this?
Yep, we can see your slides.
Okay, thanks. Okay. So thank you, Austin. Thank you, NCNK. I'm grateful to NCNK for keeping me engaged on this important relationship. And it's great to be presenting today with Jin and with Heidi. So my background, as Austin said, is building global science collaborations before I started the Global Collab Network. And so I'll be talking about the US DPRK Science Engagement Consortium and how we built trust between the US and DPRK through this work. So the purpose of the consortium that we established in 2008, the vision was to build greater trust between our countries by engaging both sides, the US and DPRK scientific communities, in safe areas of research collaboration. So we're not talking about dual use technologies, we're talking about research collaboration that is not military related. And the goal was to address common challenges that have a scientific underpinning. And so the goal of the consortium was overarching to build greater trust between our two scientific communities, to actually engage in scientific research, and to build the foundations for that research. And so my story goes with starting back in 2007. I learned about a collaboration that had been going on between the United States, Syracuse University and Kim University. I was at a AAAS meeting in San Francisco, and Stu Thorson presented there about the collaboration that he was engaged with. I was fascinated in this, that I had been working with US, Japan, and South Korean science engagement in other countries. And so I asked him if we could meet to talk about how we could build on the Syracuse collaboration, to maybe look at a vision of US DPRK science engagement more broadly. So Stu and I organized a workshop, and we brought in Fred Carrier from the Korea Society. I, at the time, was at CRDF Global in Washington, D.C., and we had a workshop on the US side in 2007 that brought together about 50 people to look at this vision and get their input, advice, and buy-in. And then soon after we created the consortium, it included my organization, CRDF Global, Syracuse, the Korea Society, where Fred Carrier was at the time, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which is a leading US scientific organization that's global. And then at that point, we spent a lot of time working to build trust between the US and the DPRK by engaging the UN mission, that is the North Korean mission to the United Nations based in New York, and really building a relationship with the officials at the mission to explain our vision and why it would be of interest to the DPRK, science engagement. And we did that by bringing the mission officials to annual meetings of the AAAS organizations. So we brought the officials to Boston, Chicago, and San Diego as a way to build trust, as a way to not only build a relationship with the mission, which Fred Carrier had. We piggybacked on his and Stu's relationship with the UN mission, but to explain to them the value of mutually beneficial science engagement, and to also explain at these meetings to the US scientific community the value of engaging with DPRK in science. So this took a good solid year and we brought in other stakeholders to these meetings. And then after this time, we were invited to send a delegation. It would be the first US science delegation to the DPRK. And we identified a leader for our delegations to Peter Agre. Peter is a Nobel laureate from Johns Hopkins, and he led our 6-person delegation. We went for a week. It was highly successful. We don't have time to go into it, but it was quite an experience. And we signed an MOU, and this laid the foundation for our vision of creating a reciprocal delegation from North Korea to the US, and then building some foundational work in order to have our vision of science collaboration. We needed to speak a common language, so English language training for DPRK scientists and a virtual science library were 2 of the foundational activities that we identified in the MOU. And then we brought the delegation from North Korea to Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm not going to go into all the details because we don't have time, but these delegation visits established, as I said, this foundational work. We then sent delegations back to Pyongyang to focus on English language and virtual science libraries. We identified during this time, of course, the obvious challenges that I think most of you are familiar with: the political climate, the lack of formal diplomatic relations. At this time, the climate was relatively positive, comparatively speaking, but we spent a lot of time also educating ourselves and making sure that we were following rules and regulations related to sanctions and restrictions on engagement. We spent a lot of time focusing on our communication channels. We had to communicate through the DPRK mission, so we couldn't communicate directly with our North Korean counterparts. The Academy of Sciences was our North Korean counterpart. And then, common differences. So we over time, through these engagements, were able to spend a lot of time better understanding our respective science systems and our respective challenges and differences in the way that we operate on science. The outcomes from these various visits, we engaged the DPRK State Academy of Scientists, the policymakers, with US institutions in Atlanta, with universities, helped them better understand on the North Korean side what a mutually beneficial scientific relationship could look like. And the same on the US side. We talked a lot about values in science of curiosity, questioning, transparency, mutual benefit, peer review. These are all really important for how scientists engage globally. And we wanted our DPRK colleagues to understand these systems. We identified capacity building initiatives in these 2 foundational areas of English language and establishing a virtual science library. And we identified some critical areas of potential research collaboration. So these are some pictures, short just to showcase some of the photos of we brought English language teachers from Syracuse. This is the Bellagio conference that we had for a week in Bellagio. We focused on, in Bellagio, really diving into some concrete areas. The Academy of Sciences presented very excellent presentations on potential areas for collaboration, from everything from salmon hatcheries to flood mitigation and management, to deforestation and environmental restoration, biodiversity, climate change, green building technologies, various different areas that we could potentially collaborate. So we, at this point, this was about 2012 when we were in Bellagio, we had established really good engagements, a lot of discussion between these 2 delegation visits, plus Bellagio, plus the technical visits to Pyongyang in these 2 areas of English language and virtual science. So we'd had, by this time, a lot of back and forth. And a vision for how we could move forward, and a real mutual appreciation for the challenges that both sides faced. On the DPRK side, one of their challenges was really needing to explain to their superiors concrete outcomes that they were getting. And they needed to be able to showcase visible benefits. At this point, our collaboration was impacted by the larger political environment in 2013 that really put a halt to collaborations. So we had to sort of reassess. Our organizations were also looking at their commitment to the partnership, and that impacted things. So in sum, our collaboration at this point was slowly pulled back for largely political reasons, funding reasons, that happens in this relationship. But the lessons learned are many that I think Heidi mentioned. And that would be building, one of the things we did when we started was we built on very strong existing relations, particularly what Fred Carrier had in his trust that he had developed with the UN mission. We spent a lot of time explaining our vision and our sincerity in our interest in building this collaboration. So there was a lot of personal interaction and understanding that we were genuine in our interest, that we were in this for the long haul, that we were willing to be patient. And we demonstrated that over time, and creative. These are a lot of the same things that Heidi mentioned, that we do not absolutely underestimate the North Koreans and their abilities, and we do not oversell what we can offer. Those were 2 very critical lessons that we learned through this time. In addition to clearly working very hard and doing our homework and always delivering what we say we will deliver, to the extent that we can do that in our abilities. Like I said, visible outcomes are very helpful. Not only do the North Koreans have to go back to their government, the scientists that we're engaging with at the Academy of Sciences, to convey the mutual benefit to their higher ups, but we also had to do the same thing in our government. We kept the State Department informed at all times, and had their support during this time. So lessons learned, obviously, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You're constantly dealing with a larger environment that you're operating in, and the challenges that go with this relationship. So I know Austin asked to make sure we touched upon some key questions. And I just wanted to say that some of the moments of successful trust building with the North Koreans, I would say, would happened in between our formal meetings, in the more off time over meals, while we were going on trips. For example, when we brought the North Koreans to Atlanta, Georgia, we took them out to learn about rivers and how we managed our waterways, and we were able to see people fishing, and there were times when we were in North Korea where we would go down in the basement of the Curio Hotel and play ping pong with our counterparts, and over dinner and meals, just learning more about each other's families. So I think what was mentioned by Jin earlier is the importance of people to people, really getting to know each other as human beings and really appreciating our common humanity. I think when you get down to that level, and you can really, that's the core of building a lot of trust between countries. It's ultimately between people. So really showing your sincerity and being open-minded and genuine and interested in your counterparts and listening. So I'm going to just end here in closing. I have a couple things I'll put in chat, but I'd urge you, if you're interested in this, to read Peter Agre's Third Act, because he was a real diplomacy leader in the science world in the United States, and not only built serious bridges with North Korea, the DPRK, but also with Cuba and Iran and Soviet Union and other countries, African countries, all over the world. So he's a real amazing human being. We created a documentary on our work with DPRK, and I'd urge you, if you're interested in this, to watch it. It highlights the Mount Pektu volcanology collaboration that was they built on our consortium foundation that we established, but you'll hear in the documentary how in volcanology, the important ways that real scientist to scientist collaboration can take shape. And then we also have on our website at the Global Collab, under initiatives, you'll see our documentary. You can download the documentary free. And then you can also there's a link to a resource page that has many other readings, and then my email. So I went over, I'm sure, Austin, but thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Linda, and also to Dongjin and to Heidi. We have a few questions in the chat, so I want to go ahead and jump right into those so we have time to get through as many as we can. The first question we have here is from my colleague Jennifer Diebert. She says this is for Dr. Kim, but we can also open it to Heidi and Linda as well. The question is, what recommendations would you share with the US and ROK governments to restart the trust building process with DPRK? And I'll kind of tack on to the question as well. There's the question of how, and also I'll add the question of why. Why is it important to continue trying to build trust? Dongjin, you had alluded to Kim Yo-jong's comments around North Korea not seemingly being interested at the moment. And Heidi and Linda, you kind of touched on some of those challenges as well. So Jennifer's question of what recommendations, and then kind of also why is this still important when it's seemingly not the interest of the North Koreans? Maybe we can start with Dongjin and then Linda and then Heidi.
Thank you, Austin, and thank you, Jennifer, for your very important question. I would like to echo many of the recommendations Heidi already shared, particularly around the importance of reciprocity, step-by-step confidence building, and sustained engagement. And at the same time, I believe it's crucial to recognize the limitations of government, especially within the constraints of political cycles and shifting administrations. Um, and back in the day, in the spirit of the Sunshine Policy under South Korean President Kim Dae-jung, which emphasized civilian first and government later, and maybe that could be something that we could really think about. Maybe the trust building efforts with the DPRK have often begun at the civil society level, perhaps quietly, relationally, and patiently, as Heidi and Linda mentioned. And I think governments should not try to do everything themselves. Instead, they may create space for and support many civil society actors, including NGOs, churches, academia, research sectors, and youth groups to engage North Korea without undue restriction or politicization. And crucially, I think this means government should also be less concerned with visibility or claiming credit and more focused on sustaining the conditions in which the human relationships could take root. Things, and again, rather than centering themselves, maybe perhaps the US and South Korean governments should act as facilitators, not gatekeepers, offering support and ensuring safety and protecting space for cross-border encounters to grow. And I think, is Austin, that you asked why. And I think at the government levels and most of the thing that we are hearing, particularly like we are so fascinated, when we're so fascinated by the just kind of the nuclear weapons and grandiose gestures and such, then sometimes we get to sort of forget about people inside of the countries. I'm not just talking about the people in DPRK, but people in the United States, people in South Korea, and how we could really think about them, and then how much their life has been affected because of this situation. And some people call a forgotten war, dormant war, but it's affecting people's life. So I believe that it's really important for us to try to really engage and then build trust with one another as fellow human being. And again, the trust isn't just about trusting others, but I think restoring trust in our shared humanity.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Linda or Heidi, do you have anything you'd like to add to that before we move to the next question?
I would just underscore what Jin said about the role of citizens and non-governmental actors, and it's the people-to-people engagements are, I think, really, really important. And at this point in time, I think that we need to figure out ways we can keep those going and make that case to the governments.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Heidi?
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I would add is that I understand the need for governments to keep an eye on the overall context and the limitations within that context. At the same time, I do think there is perhaps some low-hanging fruit that could be looked at more carefully to ease the pathway for proven, tested, trusted engagement. Maybe you don't open it up completely if you have concerns, but there are things that probably could be done to at least open things on our side, so that if and when things open on the other side, there can be a prompt and ready response.
Great, thank you. And we have a comment here from Hall Healy. He wants to share another perspective, and I believe Marissa is going to go ahead and unmute Hall so he can share some of his thoughts.
Thank you very much. I would like to suggest an opportunity, perhaps not a low-hanging fruit as Heidi suggested, but one that came out of an article that Salim Ali, who's on the call, professor at University of Delaware, wrote about in a recent Forbes magazine article. It is what I would call, or what could be called, natural diplomacy. In the tri-border area of Russia, China, and North Korea along the Tumen River, which many of you may have been to, there are already several UNESCO, Ramsar, and other sites in all three countries in close proximity. A proposal that we'd like to make, or that Salim made in his article, is to expand on those UNESCO, Ramsar, and other sites that are already under protection, and expand them to an area as well as possibly to a point of being transboundary, so that all three countries could benefit from their economic, cultural, and natural features. One exciting feature to me is the fact that this is at the southern end of the endangered Siberian tiger, of which there are only 500 left in the wild. All three countries have ratified numerous environmental treaties, including Ramsar, and North Korea would like another site that's in that same tri-border area to be included in Ramsar, designated by Ramsar. Rationale for this would be have numerous facets, but one would be leveraging the designations that are already on territory in those areas, in that area, tri-border area. Obviously, one step that would be very important would be to get, would have to be support by all three countries. And part of that would be, what are their motivations for doing this? We would be happy to send a more complete explanation of this idea to you as participants in this webinar. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you're interested in this.
Thank you, Hall. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your comments. I know you have a rich experience engaging with North Korea on natural diplomacy, and I think that's a really intriguing idea. We only have about 10 more minutes left, and we have several questions, so I want to make sure we can offer as many of those as possible for the panelists to try and get through. So the first question we have here, I think this one is from William Delzell. And he has two questions, and I'll go with his second question here. He says, has the desire for ending tensions between the two Koreas led to military unrest, particularly in South Korea, where soldiers are refusing to tolerate their commanding officers' militarism, and to demands to democratize the military? What about moves to eliminate conscription, especially the current male-only conscription law in South Korea? I think I'll pass this question to Dongjin, since you're our South Korean on panel today. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Thank you for a very interesting question. And I think in terms of the military issues, the martial law crisis last year, where soldiers showed some restraints and in some cases resisted undemocratic orders, I think it shows maturity and resilience of South Korean democracy. And at the same time, the continued enforcement of male-only conscription has become quite a deeply divisive issue, contributing to serious gender tensions within our society in South Korea. So this device, I think, reflects more than just a policy debate within the country. It underscores the unresolved structural legacy of the Korean War. And again, that we are still at war, technically speaking. It's an armistice agreement, not a peace agreement. So I think, in a sense that it's really hard to challenge this from within, particularly in terms of the set mandatory military service system, both in South Korea as well as in the DPRK in North Korea. So if we're to move towards a more sustainable peace, I think we need to go beyond technical reforms and confront the larger structural conditions and how this unended war has sort of affected even the gender issues. I mean, not only gender issues, like we were told about the environmental sort of potential environmental cooperation with Knowles from Knowles. It's just that the problem for us is that because of the situation of war, it's sometimes as though that it's really for the all common humanity, for an example, like environmental issues and for universal human rights and gender issues.
Mm-hmm.
And it all becomes divisive as though that it's really it's going to benefit us all.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in terms of challenging the current status of the amidst agreement, and then how we could really think about a different sort of system and regimes in terms of the issues of this war and conflict on the Korean Peninsula, it's really important in terms of addressing the micro issues or societal issues and also larger issues around common humanity.
Great, thank you. This next question is from Dan Moriarty, and this question is for Heidi. Heidi, you had mentioned one of the challenges is learning to hear what's not being said, or not hearing what is not being said. Are there any particular examples from your experience that you'd be willing to share?
Sure, I'll give one quickly. Early on in our work, it was very early on in the humanitarian context in North Korea, and they had not received that many delegations, particularly in the places where we were going. And so there was a lot of pressure on local officials and local directors, hospital directors, rest home directors, And often when we would visit, we're visiting tuberculosis facilities, and we would try to have an open-ended conversation about, what are your needs, what are your priorities? And they were clearly very guarded in their responses. Clearly, there was guidance that had been given about what they could and couldn't say. And so a lot of what we ended up responding to in those early years were based on just looking around and trying to put ourselves in their situation and trying to understand and anticipate what those needs would be without being explicitly told the circumstance. And then as time went on, and they became more comfortable, not just them, but also their higher ups and local authorities and provincial authorities and whatever, who were always present in these meetings. Then, as trust was built, we could have more free and open conversations that got to more of the essence of what our response needed to be.
Great, thank you. Let's see, we have several questions here. Let's jump down to, this is a question for Linda. So Linda, does your group include medical scientific research and education? And if so, has that proved to be helpful in building bridges?
Well, yes. I mean, Heidi can talk about medical. She spent a lot of time. The consortium, so we were limited in that our collaborator on the DPRK side was the Academy of Sciences. So it's not the Academy of Medical Sciences. It's not the Academy of Agricultural Sciences. So over time, we realized we were limited because of their bureaucracy and who our engagers were on their side. So I think medical, you're talking about scientific research collaboration. I think that's the distinction maybe between more like NIH type of research engagement. I think there is room for that in the future, but it would have to depend on those communities having common interests. There's certainly some potential areas. I think Key Park would be a good person to talk to, and Heidi and others that have done and engaged more on the medical side. But on the medical research side, I did spend some time talking with NIH. They're going to be, it's a government agency, so they're not going to be open to that right now. But I think medical research is a great area to work on. Yes, the answer is yes, but you'd want to learn from past experience in the medical area broadly and figure out who the best counterparts would be.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for perhaps one more question. And there were several questions kind of touching on the difficulty of this moment for those of us who work on North Korea, kind of commenting on the need to start from scratch. So I'll take this one question from John Cho, and this is for all three panelists. It says, given recent statements and actions, the Kim regime right now appears hostile to any sort of outside contact or interactions, short of military economic support from Russia and China. What might entice and convince the Kim regime to reopen themselves to dialogue, humanitarian work, and other peace-building initiatives? And perhaps we can start from Dongjin and then hear from Heidi and then Linda, and trying to keep it quite brief because we only have about a minute left. Just the easy question
Sure.
for the last minute.
Yeah. And again, that I think, as I said earlier, perhaps the answer would be, I mean, I don't want to sound too philosophical, but then maybe truth to ourselves. And I think, in any political negotiations or any human relationships, I think the problem is that sometimes it's really hard to understand the other people's intention, why you like to talk to me, why you're approaching to me. So I think if you're being true to ourselves, not without, sort of showing, I mean, and again, they need to understand why we are doing this, why we are trying to engage with them. And then they also need to understand that we would like to live in peace, and then we'd like to end the war. And if we are true selves, and then I think they eventually would need to understand why we are doing this at this difficult time.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
it's a really difficult question. I'll just own that. I think we're all struggling with this question right now. I do think that there are priorities and certainly very likely overwhelming needs in North Korea. And so if we can address those in a way that is non-political, lower profile, perhaps there might be an opening. It's just very uncertain right now.
and Linda?
Yeah, I agree, of course, with both of you, and I would just add that there are, you know, I think developing efforts where you can have opportunities for DPRK scientists to be invited to third countries. The Third World Academy of Sciences, I think that's TWAS, was one place that scientists would meet in third countries where there may be US scientists and working on areas that may be of interest, such as climate change. Just thinking really creatively and out of the box, but not bilateral, but more multilateral, or other countries hosting and involving DPRK scientists with maybe Chinese and Russian scientists too, in areas. So on whatever topic that is safe and good to talk about in terms of the larger context. So that would be my parting thought for a possible action.
Great. Well, thank you all. I know that's a very difficult question, and I also know it's a question that we at AFSC continue to think about, and the folks at NCNK are continuing to think about. And I know many of the folks on this call are continuously thinking about how do we improve the relationships between the US and North Korea, and between North Korea and the world. And so I just want to thank all three of our panelists for joining and sharing a bit of their experience. And I want to thank all of those of you in the audience who spend an hour of your evening or your morning, wherever you're at, coming to listen to this. I know that this is a very difficult problem, but I also believe it's a very important one, and one that we can make progress on. So this concludes our webinar. As I mentioned, this is recorded and it will be up on NCNK's YouTube channel, so you can rewatch it there. Thanks again to Heidi, to Dongjin, and to Linda for sharing your expertise and your time. And thanks to NCNK for hosting this with us.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you very much.